Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive with us. Today we're diving into a really fascinating period, a kind of tough one, but fascinating nonetheless. Latin America in the aftermath of the Spanish conquest. And we're not just talking about, who won which battles, but like how societies rebuild, redefine themselves after this huge clash of worldviews.
Yeah, it's a story full of contradictions. Conquest wasn't just about military power, right? It was about imposing a whole new reality on a place already brimming with ancient cultures and really complex societies.
And to help us unpack all of this, we're returning to Professor Daniel and his lecture about, well, the colonization and transformation of Latin America. What I found interesting is how he presents this encounter less as like a meeting of equals and more as this, I don't know, collision of perceptions colored by misunderstandings, shaped by assumptions even.
It's like imagine those conquistadors
Right.
landing on these shores for the first time, driven by what? A hunger for gold, this sense of religious righteousness. They looked at this new world, but with this weird mix of awe and disdain.
Yeah, it's like that saying, they saw what they wanted to see, and what they wanted was gold, land, a chance to spread their faith. It's easy to overlook, I think, the sophisticated civilizations that were already there.
And those civilizations, well, they had to grapple with these newcomers, gods,
Yeah.
demons, just really powerful warriors from some unknown land. You can almost hear the whispers, the fear. A whole world turned upside down.
The fall of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, in 1521, that kind of captures this moment perfectly. We think of it as just a military defeat, but it was so much more than that, right?
Absolutely. The city, once this symbol of Aztec power, was in ruins. Tenochtitlan, this incredible city on a lake, now rubble and ash. Its powerful image speaks to the psychological impact of conquest, I think. It's a moment etched in Latin American memory, a stark reminder that things had changed forever.
And it's here in the aftermath of the Spanish faced this daunting task. How do you actually rule this vast, diverse land? Brute force can only get you so far. They needed systems of control. And well, they found one. The encomienda system.
The encomienda, in theory, it was about granting labor from indigenous communities in exchange for protection and, importantly, conversion to Christianity. On the surface, it almost sounds civil.
Almost. But, like a lot of history, the devil's in the details, right?
Oh, absolutely. It devolved into this brutal system of exploitation. It wasn't about protecting or converting. It was about getting rich. Gold, silver, forcing indigenous populations to work for Spanish gain. It's a system born out of this need for control, but fueled by greed. And it really set the stage for centuries of exploitation and struggle.
It's a good reminder that the Spanish didn't just bring their religion and language, right? They brought their baggage. The greed, the prejudices, this worldview where the indigenous people were less than human.
Right. We have to remember this wasn't just a one-sided thing. The Spanish, they were pragmatic. They knew they couldn't just destroy everything and start over. They adapted, co-opted, learned how to exploit what was already there.
Like with the Año system, right, in the Andes. I remember learning about that, but it always seems so abstract.
So the Ajuo was more than just communal labor. It was fundamental to Andean society. Imagine your connection to the land, your ancestors, your very identity, all tied to this obligation to work the land together, sharing the work, sharing the rewards.
Like a built-in social safety net, almost, making sure everyone contributes and everyone benefits.
Exactly. And the Spanish, they saw how effective it was and basically ruthlessly exploited it. Instead of tribute going to local leaders, it went straight to the Spanish crown, fueling their ambitions.
So we've got forced labor, exploitation, but the Spanish, they wanted more. It was like they were after the soul of Latin America.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? They weren't content with just land and resources. They wanted to reshape the spiritual landscape, too. Think about it. Trying to impose a monotheistic faith on people who'd worshipped a multitude of gods for centuries. Gods tied to nature, to life and death.
Like replacing a rainforest with a manicured garden.
Exactly. And the Spanish, with their crosses and their absolute conviction. It's impressive, but also, looking back, kind of naive. Professor Daniel, he talks about this initial wave of conversions, thousands being baptized. But like we saw with the encomienda system, things aren't always what they seem.
Right. Converting on paper isn't exactly a true change of heart. Makes you think about the motivations. Was it genuine belief? Fear. Just a way to survive in this new order.
That's the question, isn't it? Professor Daniel says at first the Spanish, they almost had this simplistic view. Baptism equals conversion. But they soon realized that indigenous people weren't just abandoning their beliefs. They were adapting, blending the old with the new. I mean, how do you just erase Centuries of beliefs connected to the land, the seasons, everything.
You can't, right? It's
Yeah.
like trying to erase the sun, as Professor Daniel says.
And that's where we see the resilience of indigenous cultures. They hid their traditions within Catholicism, made it familiar, helped them navigate this new reality.
So it's less of a clean break, more like this fusion.
Syncretism, right.
Mm.
Where old gods become Catholic saints, ancient festivals get mapped onto the Catholic calendar, a cultural dance, blending steps and rhythms where you see the past and the present.
And the irony is, by trying to destroy indigenous beliefs, the Spanish actually preserved them. Those friars like Diego Duran, Bernardino de Sahagún, they documented indigenous customs and beliefs in detail.
But their goal wasn't academic, right? It was strategic.
Exactly. To convert someone, you have to understand them first.
So these records, these attempts to understand the enemy, they become these incredible windows into a world the Spanish were trying to erase, like accidentally creating a time capsule while building a fortress.
Precisely. This paradox, the destruction and preservation, it defines the era. But while they're reshaping the spiritual landscape, a new challenge is emerging, one that would test the very core of their colonial order. And that challenge, of course, is silver. And the story of Potosi really brings that to life. This legendary city, high up in the Andes, it's a symbol of incredible wealth, but also just unimaginable suffering.
Potosi's impact, it's hard to overstate it. You have this mountain, the Cerro Rico, practically overflowing with silver, a mountain of silver. It fueled the Spanish Empire, transformed global trade, but at a huge human cost.
And right at the center of it all, the mita, that forced labor system we talked about. We can discuss it in theory, but in Potosi, it becomes something else entirely.
It's true. To really grasp the mita's impact, you need to picture it. Thousands and thousands of indigenous men ripped away from their families, their homes, forced to travel for months across dangerous terrain, all to work in conditions of trade. Well, it pushes the limits of what humans can endure.
Professor Daniel describes a really grim reality in Potosi, more like death than life. We're talking mercury poisoning, exhaustion, accidents. Not to mention just the mental toll, being treated as less than human, basically tools in this giant silver machine.
And remember, it wasn't just physical hardship. These men, they were cut off from everything. Their homes, families, their spiritual practices, their entire way of life. The despair, the feeling of being powerless, it's hard to imagine.
It really makes you think twice about what progress even means, you know? Who benefits from this kind of progress and at what cost?
For sure. And still, in the face of all that, even in those minds, you see this glimmer of resilience, the human spirit refusing to be crushed. Professor Daniel talks about how the indigenous Mitayos, they held on to their traditions, their music, their stories, finding ways to celebrate, connect, to resist.
He mentions Carnival in Potosi, how important it was, this explosion of music, dancing, vibrant costumes. It's almost like for a little while the social order is flipped on its head, this release, this joyful defiance in the face of oppression.
It shows you the power of culture. Shared traditions, they provide comfort, but also the sense of identity, of resistance, even in the darkest times.
So while the Mitayos toiled and found ways to hold on to their humanity, the silver just kept flowing. This bridge of silver built on sweat, like Professor Daniel calls it, it had a global impact.
Oh, absolutely. Potosi's silver-filled Spanish coffers financed their wars, fueled their empire's growth. It ended up with merchants all over the world, reshaping trade routes, influencing the course of history.
But like you said earlier, this wealth, this obsession with controlling the silver trade, it ultimately helped to bring down Spanish power. It's ironic.
It really is. The more silver Potosi produced, the tighter the Spanish crown tried to control it, to monopolize it all. But that just made corruption and smuggling worse.
You get this whole underground economy developing. Smugglers, merchants, even corrupt officials, all finding ways to get around the rules, to get their hands on that silver. It's like the more you try to control something, the more it slips through your fingers. A classic empire problem.
Exactly. And it's in this chaotic world, this mix of cultures and ambitions, that a new people emerge. The mestizos. A mixed-race population, challenging the rigid social order that the Spanish were trying so hard to impose.
It reminds you that history is never static. Even with the violence, the exploitation, the desire to control everything and everyone, new identities were forming, new cultures taking root. The mestizos, their story is one of adaptation, survival, finding their place in this world turned upside down.
You see their story embodied in that figure of the Chola Paseña, those iconic images of indigenous women in Bolivia. Their clothing, this fascinating blend of Spanish and indigenous elements. It tells a story of cultural fusion, The manta shawl, often worn so gracefully, it comes from Spanish fashion. But the brightly colored aguayo cloth they used to carry their children, that speaks to their indigenous heritage.
A living reminder of the past. Cultures, they don't just disappear, right? They change, they adapt, they find a way to survive.
Exactly. History isn't just dates and battles. It's about the power of culture, how resilient the human spirit is, this constant interplay between destruction and creation.
Wrapping up this deep dive on the transformation of Latin America, I'm just struck by the scale of it all. The devastation, but also the incredible resilience of those who lived through it, who ultimately reshaped this land.
It makes you rethink those simple narratives we tell ourselves. It's complex,
Yeah.
messy, and the echoes of the past, they're still shaping the present in ways we might not even realize.
So next time you encounter Latin American art, music, literature, remember the stories within those stories, the echoes of ancient civilizations, the resilience of those who resisted, the power of culture to adapt, to change, and ultimately to endure.